I've been through wars. I've seen things that would make most people lose their minds. But the hardest thing I ever had to face wasn't a man. It wasn't a bomb or a bullet. It was something that shouldn't have existed in the first place, something that preyed on fear, something that moved in the dark, and for a time, it hunted us. This isn't a story about a war. It's a story about a monster, and by the time we understood what we were up against, it was already too late. You get a lot of strange calls in the military. Some are routine, others are, well, they don't belong in any manual. But I never expected this. You hear about cryptids and folklore, but the soldier in you doesn't believe. That is, until you see it for yourself. The Chupacabra, goat sucker, they called it. You won't find it in any report, but trust me, it's real. That night, in Tucapel, Chile, when everything went sideways, that's when we learned that folklore doesn't care about your beliefs. I didn't know much about it before we were sent out there. Hell, who would? Cryptid hunting isn't in the job description. The Chupacabra's origins go back to Puerto Rico in the 90s, draining goats of blood, leaving them lifeless. I laughed at first, thinking it was a ridiculous vampire animal. But standing in the Chilean woods, feeling eyes on you in the dark, you start to wonder if it's something human. At first it seemed like rumors, small, reptilian, scaly skin, sharp teeth, glowing red eyes. But then you hear it, hunted for blood, not food. By the time we got involved, the Chupacabra wasn't just a Puerto Rican myth. People across Latin America, and even parts of the U.S., were reporting similar attacks. Fast-moving creatures stalking livestock, draining them dry. It's easy to dismiss stories as superstition. But when the body count rises, and all the explanations sound more ridiculous than the last, you bring in the soldiers. I didn't believe in that stuff. My job was to focus on threats to people, foreign enemies, but puncture marks, bloodless animals, and sightings of something unnatural. My skepticism started to crack. It first seemed like a prank, but more reports came in, and soon we were called in by the government to investigate. Maybe there was something to it. Whatever it wasn't a predator we knew. By the time we arrived, the locals were already whispering the name, Chupacabra. Maybe they were right, maybe not. But I saw enough to question everything I knew. Was it a monster from folklore or a new species? You know at first. They didn't know what to call it. I didn't know. But that was the first time I thought, maybe some stories are meant to stay myths. The Chupacabra wasn't a legend anymore. It was out there, hunting. And when it came for us, we weren't ready. And at that point, we knew we messed up. The first sightings were in 1995 in Puerto Rico. Livestock drained of blood, strange puncture marks, clean and precise, like surgery. No one had an answer until a few people claimed they'd seen the creature. Descriptions varied. A small reptilian bipedal figure with scales, glowing red eyes. And it moved. Too fast. Like it was born to evade capture. The people thought it might be a new species, something we hadn't cataloged yet. But as more bodies were found, people started wondering, what if this wasn't an animal at all? By the time it reached Chile, Chupacabra wasn't just a legend, it was a presence. The deaths weren't enough to convince everyone. Some farmers blamed wild dogs or predators, but those who knew the folklore weren't so quick to dismiss it. Then, as more livestock were found dead, fear began to spread. There were stories of rustling in the trees, shadows darting out of sight. But by the time you saw anything, it was too late. Tuxapel was divided. Some said it was just a wild animal. Others said it was Chupacabra. I remember hearing that name from a man who had lived through the horror. He said it with a seriousness that made me think he'd seen something that changed him. As more cattle and goats were found dead, the skepticism cracked. What we didn't know was how close we were to a nightmare. By the time we figured it out, the creature had already claimed more lives than we imagined. We were too late to stop it, too late to put the fear to rest, and so, like a ghost story we couldn't outrun, the Chupacabra became real. It wasn't folklore anymore. It was hunting in the hills of Chile, something beyond natural, something that shouldn't have existed. In April 2000, strange things began happening in Tuxapel. You hear about unexplainable incidents in the military all the time, things that keep you up at night. But this place, this town, changed how I saw the world. I'm talking about the lights. At first, it didn't seem like an immediate threat, just another odd phenomenon, something you'd brush off as just the weather. But this wasn't a storm. It wasn't a freak lightning strike. One night, just past midnight, the townsfolk saw it. Lights in the sky, flickering in patterns that made no sense. They moved in ways no aircraft could, bright, erratic, casting an unnatural glow over the jagged hills. You could hear the whispers. What was that? The lights hovered, stayed still, then zipped across the sky faster than any plane. It wasn't just the lights. It was the way they felt, like they were watching you. It set a chill in the air that nothing could shake. By morning, the town was buzzing. But when they went outside, they found flattened patches of brambles, pressed into the earth like something massive had passed through. Some said it was the wind, but others, the ones who'd seen the lights, knew better. The plants didn't just fall, they were forced down, leaving a trail. Then came the deaths. Livestock started dying. Goats at first, drained of blood. The farmers tried to blame predators, wild dogs, a cougar, but it wasn't any usual attack. There were puncture wounds around their necks, no signs of struggle. The animals didn't fight, they just died. And the blood? Gone, every last drop. It was in the air now, the question, the fear. What had started as a strange phenomenon had become something terrifying. It wasn't just an animal. It wasn't a freak accident. The creature that haunted stories for years was real, and it was hunting. Miguel Hernandez was a practical man. He'd spent his life working the land, raising cattle. Nothing rattled him, not storms, wild animals, or even the rumors of a creature that drained blood from goats. He'd heard the whispers, but to him, they were just myths. That was before he stepped into the fields that night, under the same starry sky that had flickered with strange lights just days earlier. It was late, the wind cold against his face. His cattle were acting strange, skittish. He figured it was nothing but decided to check on them one last time. Then the hairs on his neck stood up. Something was off. At first, he thought it was the wind rustling the leaves, but then he heard it. Movement in the shadows. He paused, breath caught in his chest. The breeze stopped. Silence, the kind that made you feel watched. Miguel scanned the field, then his heart skipped. Two glowing eyes, piercing, red-hot, unnatural, staring right at him. He froze. The creature began to take shape, fast, too fast. A reptilian, scaled figure, thin, hunched, long, spindly limbs, bat-like wings. It rippled with unnatural energy, ready to spring. Miguel's pulse raced. His instinct screamed to run, but his feet wouldn't move. He stared at the creature, and for a moment everything went still. Then, with a flash, it vanished into the shadows. Miguel stood, breath shallow. It was real. Something out there was hunting, and it wasn't human. Shaken, he stumbled back to the barn. He didn't want to believe it, but deep down, he couldn't deny what he'd seen. The Chupacabra wasn't a story anymore. It was hunting in the hills of Tucapel. He didn't tell anyone. Who would believe him? They'd laugh, call him crazy. But what he saw, those glowing eyes, he couldn't unsee. The next morning, he heard the rumors. Felipe Alvarez, another farmer, had seen something too. Glowing eyes, quick movements, the same creature. More people began speaking up, each story slightly different, but the same essence. Something was out there. Some thought it was a mutated animal, but others whispered the name, Chupacabra, with fear. The creature wasn't a story anymore. It was real, and it was hunting. The town was divided. Some refused to believe it, but others saw the fear in the eyes of those who'd encountered it. They knew whatever was out there couldn't be explained away. As sightings increased, terror spread. One thing was clear, the Chupacabra was no longer a myth. It was real, and it had come to Tucapel. The town had a choice, ignore it or face it. But to face it, they needed to know what they were up against. When the Chilean military arrived in Tucapel, they approached with their usual professional detachment. This wasn't their first crisis, but nothing about this felt typical. No enemy soldiers, no landmines. What they were investigating didn't belong in any military handbook. Their orders were simple: investigate the deaths, contain panic, restore order. But as they set up on the outskirts of town, the air was thick with uncertainty. At first, the soldiers dismissed the Chupacabra rumors as just that, rumors. They thought it was a wild animal, something dangerous, but ultimately predictable. They couldn't take the story seriously, not yet. The first few days were calm. Surveillance teams set up, traps were laid, and cameras installed. They reassured the townspeople the government had it under control. But as the investigation deepened, the creatures weren't behaving like anything the military had encountered before. Soldiers reported strange sightings, fast-moving figures in the dark, shapes that darted between trees. They never got close enough to capture or engage, but what they saw was enough to unsettle them. These creatures were intelligent, quick, cunning predators outmaneuvering the military's best efforts. More sightings followed. Soldiers would set up camp, expecting routine, only to be awakened by something fast moving through the brush. Something didn't belong. A few soldiers spoke of an encounter at an abandoned mine on the outskirts. They claimed to have found not one, but 3 chupacabras, which were subdued and locked in cages. But despite the growing reports, the military remained silent. No confirmation, no denial. The silence sent the town into a frenzy. Rumors spread quickly. What were they hiding? If they captured 3 chupacabras, why wasn't anyone talking about it? For some, the silence confirmed their worst fears. The chupacabra wasn't just a predator. It might be part of something more sinister. As weeks passed, conspiracy theories spread. Some wondered if the military was experimenting with biological weapons, or if the creatures were part of a secret government project gone wrong. A few even speculated that NASA might be involved, that these creatures were the result of extraterrestrial experiments. The fear in the town wasn't just about the creature anymore. It was about what else was out there. People heard strange noises in the woods, rustlings, whispers. The military's refusal to speak only fueled the fire. Fear spread through the military ranks, too. More soldiers reported the strange behavior of the creatures. Some whispered about things they'd seen, creatures vanishing into the earth, disappearing without a trace. The soldiers felt like they were always one step behind, as if the creatures were toying with them. The questions kept piling up. What were the military really doing out there? What were they hiding? In Chupacabra, the tension was palpable. The town had shifted from a peaceful rural area to a place thick with fear, suspicion, and paranoia. But the military had their orders: investigate, capture, and remain silent. And in the darkness of the Chilean hills, something moved. Something was out there, and no one knew how deep the mystery went. As the military's grip tightened, the real war had only just begun. On May 7th, 2000, Felipe Alvarez, a local farmer, was working late in his fields. It seemed like any other night, but there was an unease in the air, and his cows were restless. He dismissed it, not realizing what was about to happen. First, he heard the rustling in the brush, soft at first, then louder. He thought it was the wind, but it grew deliberate. Something was creeping closer. He scanned the night, but all he saw were shadows. A cold sense of being watched crept over him, but he ignored it, his instincts telling him something was wrong. Then it happened. A creature leapt from the darkness, fast and violent. Felipe barely had time to react as sharp claws raked across his back, knocking him down. Pain shot through him as the creature's fangs sank into his neck, draining his blood with terrifying precision. He fought back with every ounce of strength, but the creature was relentless. Its glowing red eyes locked onto his, as if it knew exactly what it was doing. Just as Felipe's strength faded, a distant shout broke through. Miguel Hernandez, pitchfork in hand, rushed toward him. The Chupacabra recoiled and vanished into the shadows. Felipe, bloodied and weak, was dragged to safety by Miguel. The terror was real now. Hours later, special operations units armed with advanced equipment were deployed. The town of Chupacabra went into lockdown, but the creature remained elusive. It struck when least expected, always one step ahead. Fear grew. The military responded with a full-scale assault. Specialized units armed with tranquilizer darts and rifles were sent into the forests. The creature's speed was almost supernatural, moving in and out of the shadows, always evading capture. Every trap the soldiers set was outsmarted. They were fighting an enemy they couldn't see, let alone understand. Then came the discovery. Strange, leathery eggs found just outside Chupacabra. Could the Chupacabra be breeding? Was this only one of many? The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through the military. But despite the discovery, the creature continued to elude them. After a chaotic final confrontation, the military withdrew, exhausted and defeated. The operation was called off. No statements were issued, and as far as the public knew, the Chupacabra was still out there. The people of Chupacabra returned to their lives, but nothing was the same. The Chupacabra became a dark part of the town's folklore, but the truth, whatever it was, remained buried, leaving more questions than answers. The creature never left. It faded back into the shadows, and the silence that followed was more unsettling than any sound. The attacks ceased as suddenly as they had begun, and slowly life in Tucapel returned to its quiet rhythm. The military pulled out, leaving behind only the whispered echoes of their failed operation. The strange creature that had haunted their nights, that had turned their peaceful town into a place of fear, was gone, at least for now. But the questions it left behind lingered in the minds of the townspeople, unanswered and unsettling. The legend of the Chupacabra only grew stronger, woven into the fabric of local folklore. It became a part of their history, a terrifying tale that would be passed down through generations. Yet the people of Tucapel knew the truth. They had seen the creature with their own eyes. They knew it wasn't just a myth. Was it a natural predator, a secret government experiment gone awry, or something else entirely? The answers remained elusive, buried beneath the silence of the military and the fading echoes of those dark days. Would the creature return? No one could say. The terror it caused may have ended, but the fear of its return, of what lurked in the shadows, would never fully disappear. The mystery of the Chupacabra remained unsolved, its truth forever shrouded in uncertainty. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button, share, and subscribe to War Chronicles Unseen for more gripping tales.